Greetings, folks. Welcome back to the Jason Damico show. I'm really excited about this episode for a variety of reasons, but this guest really needs no introduction, but we have a nice little bio here, and that'll give you an idea of the scope of his life and work, which is extremely overwhelming, and I'm going to do my best to touch on a little bit of each area during this interview. But this author, director, and photographer has worked in nearly 70 countries, shooting stories and covers for many of the major magazines of the world. At various times in his career, he's been a contract photographer for Sports Illustrated, a staff photographer at Life, and a 25-year contributor to the National Geographic. He shot the first all-digital coverage in the history of the National Geographic, titled The Future of Flying. Coverage was deemed significant enough to be acquired for preservation by the Library of Congress. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, he also created Faces of Ground Zero using the world's only life-size Polaroid camera. As a traveling exhibit and a book, it helped raise approximately $2 million for the 9/11 relief efforts. Our guest has penned several best-selling photo books, photographed the noteworthy, and won many photo honors and prizes. He continues to use too many flashes and writes a humorous, heartfelt blog about being a shooter, but after all these years, the best thing about his life is that he still has his eye on a camera and he's married to the wonderful Annie Cahill. Please welcome the world-renowned, I am humbled to say, Mr. Joe McNally. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, Jason, Lord, that's thank you for having me. There's a lot of water under this particular bridge you're talking to right here for sure. But I tell you, back at you, man. I'm so glad we met. Awed by your talent, your guitar skills, your voice, and here you are, presence, with podcasting and acting, so back at you.
Well,
much admiration.
Thank you. Joe, just for the viewers, Joe and I had the opportunity to work together back in 2019 in Tunica, Mississippi, and it was just an incredible experience for me. And being in the music industry and film and constantly in front of cameras, Joe took everything to a notch and a level that I wasn't even aware of. It didn't even feel like we were shooting. So I just want to point that out there. Thank you for being probably the best photo shoot I've ever experienced. It was surreal.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. Well, your presence in front of the camera was welcome indeed. I mean, we can't really talk too much about the specifics because the client has yet to use it, given the fact we're all kind of at home right now.
Sure.
But from my end, as a photographer, you were a gift in front of camera because I needed somebody to embody a certain persona. We were working in a very famous diner, the Hollywood Diner.
Yep.
Which, was immortalized in song, years ago. And I needed a very soulful kind of easy presence in front of the lens. And you just inhabited that niche that we had there in the diner up by the windows and whatnot. You just became a really wonderful photograph. So that when I see someone like you and I make a picture of them, my thought in my head is like, well, this is a person who's comfortable in their own skin, right? Confidence, and just has a feel. And that's an ineffable quality that you run across. Not all the time as a photographer. Some folks are, not blaming them. They're not comfortable in front of a camera. They're a square peg in a round hole when you put them out there and they're like, whoa, what do I do? There was none of that with you. You were like, easy. It's wonderful.
Wow. Well, thank you. We'll migrate from there into really your beginning stages. So like I said in the intro, your career, we could be here in 10 mini-series talking about what you've done. I'm going to try and keep everything somewhat condensed and really hit some pinpoints that perhaps have not been elaborated on in other interviews, because you've been covered for a variety of mediums. I'm going to try and really get into your brain, so to speak. I want to get into your beginning stages as far as how you got into photography, how you became inspired, maybe beginning influences, just kind of those early years for you.
Sure. I my first love, or what drove my career direction was I've always loved stories. I did a lot of reading as a kid, adventures and all that sort of stuff, typical boy stuff,
Right.
and I also went to 5 different grammar schools. So I was
Wow.
always the new kid, and I kind of had to adapt. And so I retreated sometimes into books, Jack London and adventures and this and that. So I always grew up with a love of story. And so I thought in high school, well, I could maybe be, a journalist, and so I went to Syracuse University, the School of Journalism, and I thought, well, I was a wannabe athlete, not great, but love sports. So I thought, well, maybe I could be a sports writer. That would keep me close to the world of sports, which I really love. But in the course of being at Syracuse, I was required to take a photography class. And when I took a camera in hand, I borrowed my dad's old vacation camera for my first class. It just felt completely natural in my hands. And it was kind of a eureka moment, for me.
Right.
I was like, I can work this. I think I can do this. I wasn't any good. I was a student, but it felt comfortable.
Felt natural. Yeah.
Yeah. So I stayed in school for a little bit longer beyond my undergraduate to acquire some skills. And then I headed to New York, and I was pretty determined to stick in New York. A lot of my friends from school went to small newspapers, scattered around the country. That was be your entry point. I was like, no, man, I'm taking on the big city. I'm going to stick or die. And it was rough. New York is a very harsh taskmaster, as you probably know in the music business, competitive, tough, especially when, you go fresh out of school. I knew nothing. I was so stupid, I didn't even know what I didn't know,
Right,
I was showing my portfolio, and people were like, yeah, come back in 5 years.
Ooh.
Yeah. So yeah, but I did get a job, not as a photographer. I got a job as a copy boy at the New York Daily News, which was New York's picture newspaper. It was the tabloid of legend, it was, the famous headline, Ford to City, drop dead. It had columnists like Pete Hamill and Jimmy Breslin,
Wow.
It was just a very historic paper. As papers go now, much less powerful presence, But back then, it had a circulation in mid-70s, I'm going to guess maybe 1.5 million. Had 57 staff photographers. They have none now.
Yeah.
And I got dropped in, I got schooled, in all these traditional, beautiful legends of photography, Stieglitz and Steichen and W. Eugene Smith and all those, legendary photojournalists. And then I got dropped into the hot bath of New York City tabloid journalism.
Wow.
Screaming headlines, death and mayhem, socialites getting caught with somebody they weren't supposed to be with. I mean, that was what the Daily News chewed on every day.
Right.
I was like, my head was spinning, man. My head was spinning.
How did that work as far as the scheduling, right? Because you've got the turnaround on that stuff is insanely quick.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
these are back in the film days, right? So no digital, all film.
All film, yeah. Photographers would shoot a job, drop film in a baggie, an envelope, drop them in there, put their captions, processing instructions, and that was part of my job as a copy boy. I'd get on the subway and I'd head up to Yankee Stadium, and I'd collect all the photographers' film, and then I'd run it back on the subway, and try to make the 1 star. The deadline for the 1 star was like 5 o'clock ish. The 1 star was tomorrow's newspaper tonight. So they went through 4 editions, 4 stars. So the 1 star, and New York being New York, there's people out there waiting for the 1 star because they want to get a 1-up on everybody else, right? So like, if you can get tomorrow's paper tonight, man, I got it over on you, buddy. Hey, I mean, that's New York, right? So,
100%.
so yeah, so that was part of my job. They knew the new copy kid liked pictures, so they would send me out on photographic related stuff, and I would ride with the photographers, try to learn the craft, and I got aware of the mission very quickly because I was with Jimmy McGrath. I remember Jimmy was a wonderful photographer. It's passed on now, but we start booking on a job because you have scanners in all the cars, right? So all the news is coming across the scanner, and it's like a jumper at Park and 66th. And Jimmy starts booking on this. I mean, we're running red lights, we're just missing death, and I'm like, why are you moving so fast on this, man? You don't even know what's really happening. And he goes, Park and 66, it might be somebody rich. And I was like, that was it, man.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, it was my first dead body.
How long did this last for?
Oh, I was at the Daily News for 3 years.
Okay.
And then they fired me. The economic reverberations of what we see now were starting even way back then. And so Daily News went through a contraction. I was last hired, first fired, and I got dumped out on the street, which was a great thing to have happen because I had to make a living. And so I took what skills I had acquired over that 3-year learning period, and I hit the streets and I started freelancing, what we used to call stringing.
Right.
Back in the day, I became a stringer for the New York Times, for the UPI, for the Associated Press, Philadelphia Inquirer, etc. And that's how I kind of learned the ropes in New York.
Well, we'll segue into entrepreneurship. I've got that as one of the bullet points. Obviously, the photography world, especially the artist world in general, and now with the COVID-19 outbreak and what we're seeing, just the resourcefulness that needs to be, it's a different world. We'll put it that way. But we've seen the trends and we've seen adaptation over the years as artists. In those early stages for you, how were you a natural entrepreneur? Did it come naturally? Was it a little difficult? Walk me through that when that transition happened.
Yeah, it was difficult because, Jason, I was just an Irish Catholic kid. When I first went to the Daily News, I called everybody Mister. And they were, one of the guys took me aside and says, "Don't do that." I was showing up to work every day early, and the lab manager was like, "Don't come in early. You make everybody else look bad." Because that was just, so it was hard for me. Ray Paganelli at the New York Times saw some promise in me, and I had a couple of front pages of the Times, and he goes, "Yeah, you're going to do okay, kid. First thing you got to get is a money manager." He was a cigar smoking picture assignment there. "You got to get a money manager. You got to, establish yourself." I was like, what? But yes, what you're indicating is something that we've all had to confront. Like when I started this, I was just a photographer, but then you realize as all this has tumbled forward, you have to become a brand, right? And you have to look after that brand and nurture it and try to guide the ship in directions that are oftentimes, you can't really predict, So
it's a great point.
I mean, when you first started strumming on a guitar, did you see back then that you would have a podcast? No,
absolutely
right?
not. I mean, even a year ago, because this has only been for 9 months. I think we're about 50 episodes in at this point, and it's no, not at all. It's a great, that's a great example.
Sure, yeah. So I had a friend, wildlife, landscape, aviation photographer, Moose Peterson. He's a big dude, and I don't know. 12 years ago, maybe more, he was like, "Where's your blog?" He wouldn't even say hello anymore. Whenever he'd see me, he'd go, "I'm not seeing a blog." And that was Moose, big guy. And so I started writing a blog, which reconnected me with writing and the fact that I do enjoy it. And I have a blog to this day. But back then, I honestly didn't even know what a blog was.
Right.
I mean, but it's all part of an extension of being an entrepreneur. And I always counsel young photographers that you have to have a voice in the marketplace. And at this point in time, it's best to have as many lines in the water as you possibly can. So here at our studio, we shoot commercial jobs, we shoot editorial jobs. I blog. We work with brands within our industry, and we sell gallery prints, and we just do a whole variety of things. I have Twitter presence, Instagram, and so that's a lot of stuff to process as a very small business, but it's necessary. It really is.
Well, and I think the diversification I've learned over the years, it actually makes it more fun. There's more headaches involved, but at least it financially, there's more options. Creatively, there's more options, and you find that nice synergistic overlap that occurs, and just relationship building as well.
Absolutely. This is a business of relationships. Look at us. We're talking, we met 6 months ago, 5 months ago, and we were like, shook hands and said, nice job. And who knew, So here we are on a podcast. So yeah. And there are things that I think stick with you during the course of your career. And pictures certain significant pictures, on my end of the fence here for sure. Mm-hmm. And then also when you get involved and you do some serious photography with people, oftentimes friendships and relationships ongoing spring from that. I've made pictures of people 25 years ago and I'm still friends with them.
You're capturing moments for folks that are they perhaps will come once in a lifetime, and that's one thing. I mean, I dabble with photography. I've had to just because of the visual world that we're in, and I kind of fell in love with it myself. I enjoy film more just because I'm more from that world of telling stories with that type of narrative and that type of structure. But when you I've noticed this. When you take a photo of someone and it comes out well and they're really happy with it, it makes them feel very good. I mean, we feel the same way. If you get a picture that's really flattering of yourself, and somebody facilitated that process, there's some sort of, it's almost like a spiritual connection that may happen during that process. Sure.
Like, I mentioned earlier that you were good in front of the camera, and you're a performer. You've been on many stages. Most people aren't like that. So sometimes if you get that really exceptional photograph of somebody who's not used to being photographed, or even told you, oh, I don't take a good picture, and then they see themselves, and it's almost like they see themselves as beautiful for maybe the first time in their life.
Right.
Or they realize they have that certain presence that you found that they might not have even been aware of. So, and that's a really wonderful thing. That's a beautiful gift you can give your subject as a photographer, simply to do a really good job for them.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm going to try and tie 3 points into one here. We'll dive into creative process. We'll dive into subject working with a subject or subjects. Also, just your thought process behind capturing moments. These are very broad paintbrush strokes here, and I'm sure you could teach a 4-year course in photography on all this. But just your thoughts on some of these topics and what you're going for, what you've seen over the last however many decades of doing this.
There's a lot. It's funny. It's a simple process, but it's also a complex process, right? Go click.
Right.
Especially now in the day of the iPhone, everybody's a photographer. Everybody's got a camera in their pocket. It's like, oh, hey, but photography at a significant level is still a pretty hard thing to do. And you can go about it in a number of ways. Sometimes you're just swept up in events. I've done a lot of news photography. I've done, politics and sports. And I've been in some difficult areas of the world, things you cannot control. And you have to develop a sense for the narrative. You mentioned narrative earlier, that's what you're trying to provide. for the National Geographic, they're not interested in pretty pictures or headshots. They're interested in your ability to tell a story, to move the reader from page to page in a logical, beautiful way. So there is that aspect of how you can go about it. Then there's also, I've done a lot of celebrity photography, and a lot of that is preparation and pre-visualization, concept photography. How do I take a difficult concept and make it real for the reader? I've done some science stories for the National Geographic, giant telescopes. I've done 2 stories on giant telescopes. Now, the magazine really hates you when they send you to do a telescope story because, you get sent to these lonely, dark mountaintops in the middle of frickin' nowhere. You're freezing your ass off and you stay up for night after night after night. And it is miserable.
Man.
Miserable. But you have to do the job. You said yes, etc. So how do you take these giant telescopes and all the science that's wrapped up in them and make it real for the reader who's probably inclined not to give a rat's ass about telescopes? The reader's doing this, right? Oh yeah. You want your picture to make them do this. Huh.
Right.
Get them involved.
Engagement.
That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And this is hard to do now because look at, the world around us. You've got, all the social media streams. People are getting instant messages, this and that.
Right.
Visuals are just cascading over our eyeballs every single day. So how do you make somebody stop and pay attention to the picture you just made? That's the key.
That's fantastic. How do you do that? Is that just an ongoing question for humanity and the artistic process until you're on your deathbed? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, I'll be a photographer, I think, probably until the day I die. They'll put me in a box with a camera in my hands. It'll be a Nikon camera,
Right.
I've shot Nikon my whole career, but you pinpoint it. It's very articulate, path that you've crafted for us here, because that is that unknown quality. Quick thing, I've done a fair amount of teaching, and I've taught twice out at Google, out in out in the West Coast.
I saw one of those on YouTube. Somebody had it up from, I think, like 2008 or 2000, somewhere.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
So one of the classes that I taught, I would do those big lectures, the one that you saw, and then I would do a smaller class for like 15 people, and we'd go over skills and spend a day together. And Google folks are Google folks, right? So I'm up there in the class. I haven't even got a chance to say, hi, my name's Joe McNally, when some guy in the front row goes, excuse me. He goes, look, we're Google engineers. We're really smart. We know how the camera works. What we want to know is, how do we find a picture? And I was like, yeah, that's the $64 question, dude. You can have all the gear in the world, but if you haven't got a sense of story,
right,
of elegance, of beauty, of being able to have your heart and your head expressed, your sympathy for the human condition through that lens, then you're screwed. Just take all the fancy equipment and, go shoot, a few pretty pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that. I did a story once for Geographic on the power grid of the United States, and I was flying a lot of helicopters. And this one helicopter pilot, pretty macho guy, he's like, yeah, he's telling me all the equipment, because that happens. It's like being a doctor at a cocktail party. Hey, oh, you're a doctor. Oh, hey, I got this thing, And so you tell people you're a photographer, right? And this guy's like, oh yeah, I got this, and I got the 500 millimeter f4 with the Eddie Bauer camouflage.
Yeah.
He's just going on, and then at the end of it, he just goes, the problem I have is content. I'm like, that's a pretty big problem, dude.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I got my composition. That's my problem. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, just take up the whole frame while you're at it.
Right. I mean, it don't matter how many pixels are in there. That don't matter anymore.
Right.
We got enough pixels. It matters what you do with them.
Right.
You know,
I gotta say, you know, when we were doing our shoot, and I'm gonna get my phone out real quick so I can just have immediate reference. I was like, hey Joe, you know, blah blah, because I had no idea. I was like, just having a good time. We were hanging out, eating lunch after the shoot. I was up all night basically commuting. We've been through that story, but I go to your Instagram and I see 230,000 plus. It just overwhelming, you know, about 1,000 pictures here that are just each one just gripping, engaging, so sharp. Whether it doesn't even matter the depth of field or what's good. It's just so vivid, so sharp. The only way I can describe it, for me personally, your work is so real. Like, that's literally the only way I can describe it. Can stare at it for a long time. I just keep finding details, keep finding nuances, and this really isn't leading up to a question. I'm just bringing it to your forefront. Maybe the question is, was that what you were going for all of these years, or is that just your natural voice? Because if it is, it's a total gift. I've never seen it really with anybody else the way that you're able to present it.
Well, thank you for that. I mean,
I know it's a lot,
as a photographer, you're like a redwood. You know, you rings as you grow. You know, you age. You know, and so I think yes, seeing well is a gift, to be sure. There's elements of it that can be learned. Certainly technique can be learned. And certainly what happens sometimes with photographers, certainly it happened to me, is sometimes the marketplace dictates to you. Photo editors can see things in you that you might not even see in yourself. And they start to give you the kind of jobs they think you'll be strong at. And a path is almost created for you. You know,
interesting.
And so you do learn the craft, etc. But seeing well is, again, it's part of who you are. That's why it's kind of rough, you know, for anybody. Being critiqued is hard.
Yeah.
But when you show your pictures to somebody, you really sort of taking your clothes off. You know, when you're looking at, here's my portfolio, or here's the thing I just did visually. It comes out of my imagination, something really important to me. It's like you're getting really naked at that point, and therefore you can be hurt really badly if somebody doesn't react. So photography is very much, you know, kind of intertwined with your heart and your emotions. And I know for me, I mentioned growing up, you know, the legends and all that stuff that I used to read. I used to read a lot of comic books too. I love comic books, and comic books are a really powerful storytelling device. And there was an artist, he's passed on now. His name was Frank Frazetta, and he had all this great kind of warrior. He drew the original Conan comic books, you know?
Yeah.
And I know I can see that in my work now. You know, low angle camera, hero point of view, strong color palette, forceful, oftentimes graphical.
Yeah.
I know that stuff influenced me.
Well, while we're on this, I've got a couple of major components of photography: composition, depth of field, lighting. Just some general thoughts on that. I know we could be here until literally the end of the world discussing it. But just your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those elements.
Sure. I mean, composition, you know, obviously it's what you see in the frame and how you arrange it.
Mm-hmm.
Thing to remember, again, when I teach, I always tell, you know, young photographers, you know, what you don't put in the picture is just as important as what you put in the picture, because the elements that you arrange in that photograph will help you tell the story of in my case, the person. Because I'm a people photographer. I'm not a landscape or wildlife shooter. I'm not a still life shooter. God almighty, I suck at still life. And so I really need that engagement. You know, I like to have somebody, even if somebody's giving me a tussle, I enjoy that more than a walk in the woods, to be honest,
Right.
So yeah, so your composition and your engagement with the scene is very powerful in the way you tell a story. Elements that you arrange or naturally arrange for you. You have to have an eye for that. And sometimes it's just a tweak, it's just a blip. I find sometimes I almost feel a picture before I see it.
Interesting.
And you kind of like look around, and then you just have to settle in and start to wrap the camera around the scene in the most powerful way you can. There's lots of rules of composition. They are designed to be broken, right? There's the famous rule of thirds.
Right.
Make sure you have somebody not in the middle of your photograph. But then again, sometimes when somebody occupies that central place in your image, in your composition, they assume a power, because then there's a centrality to it. So composition is really literally as you see it. There's lots of photographers out there who routinely break the rules of composition in very effective ways. So there's that. Lighting.
Yeah.
I always tell people light is your language as a photographer. It's how you use light is very much a storytelling device or tool that you have. Harsh light. I always describe light in very human terms. It's not just like, it's look at that light. It's a sunset light. Light to me is very emotional. So it can be angry, it can be slashing, it can be voluptuous, it can be rapturous, it can be soft as a baby, it can be hard as a knife.
Wow.
I mean, all that sort of stuff. I find when I talk about it that way, it helps me pre-visualize the light that should be applied to this subject.
Yeah. I've never heard of it that way before.
Yeah, like when we photographed together at the diner, they had those two big, beautiful windows.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really my light sources. I didn't hardly put up any light inside. There was one accent light inside, but the predominant nature of the light came from outside because I wanted the light to look effortless. I wanted the light to look like it was supposed to be there anyway.
Was the accent light that weird cone looking? That I've seen one of those before in one of your other videos after our shoot, and I think it had to do with just trying to accent a foot or something like that. I don't know what you were trying to do, but it was really interesting, the timing between that, and you guys were just working on some of the settings with all of that.
Yep. Think of it this way. When you launch a picture into the world, a lot of people are going to see it. You're never going to meet them. So you always have to remember as a photographer, you are not there to narrate your photograph, right? You're not there saying, oh, see, look over here and then over here.
Right.
No, someone has to do that on their own. So by lighting something or not lighting it, you give somebody a visual roadmap to your photograph. They're able to meander through, and the visual cues you give them are oftentimes related to how you use light. Because our eyes are physiologically, we are programmed. There's no choice that we have. Our eyes are drawn to light and bright. So like there's a window over here you can't see. Mentally, my brain is saying, look up here because it's brighter than everything else in the room.
It's like the reticular activation system, so to speak. Because now that you just said that, now I'm thinking about this light over here, and I'm thinking about the light over there. It's pretty funny. Depth of field for you. A lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I go through your Instagram, I would say a good 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 80 to 90% are usually landscape, high f-stop, very, very small aperture, so to speak. Is that kind of your voice more so than narrow depth of field, really, really wide open? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the depth of field, again, powerful tool. It lets you, big depth of field, which is what you're referring to, gives the information to the viewer. Like, here's the person and the surroundings are sharp. Helps you tell the story. Minimum depth of field becomes more suggestive. And you're hinting at what's in the background there. You're letting this viewer, the subject, maybe dream about what might be back there.
Right.
So there's a lot of depth of field stuff going on in photography nowadays. I don't know if you have heard the term bokeh.
I haven't.
It used to be, to me, the out of focus stuff in the back of the picture. Now there's a term for it, B-O-K-E-H, bokeh. Some people refer to it as bokeh, because there's a real powerful, I wouldn't call it a movement, but it's a style that's very popular right now. Minimum depth of field, like razor thin depth of field.
Yes.
Eyes are sharp. Everything else is out of focus.
Yes.
Right?
I've seen that.
And that's a certain style and graphical approach that a lot of photographers are using very effectively. I've been experimenting with it myself. It's a bear sometimes, because when you're working with that minimum amount that's actually sharp in the photograph, man, you got to be right on in your focus. You're going to lose.
I got used to it, from time to time. I'd go out, do a little videography for some friends, their bands, whatever, and often I would have, because in those situations, and if you've shot live performers before, as you have, I'm sure, especially with music, all the lighting is just there for you, and things just kind of happen as they do. There's that intangible aspect, kind of like you were talking about, out of control. But because the lighting is so random, so to speak, I would find myself at literally wide open on a 50 millimeter. And that was really the best I could do, because the ISO, I wanted to keep it as low as possible in those low light situations. So I got kind of used to playing around at 1.8 on just a 50 millimeter. And there's some gorgeous things that happen in the background or in the foreground, depending on where you're focused. It's like art. It's like this weird painting type of, it's interesting what can happen with a narrow depth of field, but it's difficult. It's difficult.
It is difficult. Yeah, but you're right. 1.8 has a look. It has a look, and it's very different than f8 or f16 for sure. So yeah, these are a swirl of tools that you have in your bag that you bring them out and apply them as you see fit.
I want to talk about, we'll kind of shift gears for a little bit here, the Dubai shoot, the Burj Khalifa, because that's just, I got to put a link to the video in the description box when this is on YouTube and all the other platforms. I was watching that video. I was like having heart palpitations. My palms were sweating. I was like, this is nuts. I've got to hear from you a little bit on that personally, that experience. It was just wild.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was hard fought, or hard won, I guess you would say, because I have a bit of a history of climbing things. I've climbed the Empire State Building 4 times to the, the blinking red light that's at the very tip of the antenna.
Right.
I've climbed up there 4 times. I climbed the Queensboro Bridge. And so I had this kind of urge. I always call it the urge to get your camera someplace different, someplace that people are not likely to get to. So I started pestering. I had a couple of contacts in Dubai because I've worked there a fair amount. And they gave me a contact, and I started pestering the Burj Khalifa. As you can imagine, it's not an easy thing. They don't say, oh, yeah, come next week. No problem. It took 3 years.
3 years?
To wrangle the permission.
Man.
I started working on it, and it took about 3 years to finally get a yes.
Wow.
And nobody was paying me to go up there. I wasn't on assignment, and nobody had told me, Joe, you must climb the Burj Khalifa before you die. No, I just something that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I figured my credentials of having climbed some notable buildings, I climbed the antenna on the trade centers, the original trade centers.
Wow.
And so I had this history, and that helped me. They said, all right, So we went and we climbed.
Sign your waiver and, yeah. That's it.
Oh yeah, my name is on many pieces of paper all over the world declaring my life to be absolutely worthless. Yep, no, not gonna sue you. Don't worry about it. If I die up there, don't even, just don't even think about it. It's okay.
I mean, it's a good way to go out if you think about it. You got a Nikon in one hand and the other.
Could you imagine? I mean, it would be the stuff of legend, right?
The other one's coming in contact with half-mile high air, right? It's like half a mile up.
Yeah, it's way up there. When you're standing, I stood on top of the spire where the aircraft warning lights are, and I thought, okay, I'm standing on these lights, so I'm now on top of the highest man-made point in the world. That was kind of cool. That was fun. The guys I went up with were great guys. Mick, was great. He was an English bloke. He was my safety watcher, and he was funny, because when the rare occasion they let a civilian up there, they're concerned, right? Because people can freak out, people can get nervous. And so Mick, I'll do a bad English accent here, he's like, so Joe, people sometimes panic in the bucket. You're not going to panic, are you, Joe? I'm like, no, Mick, I'm not going to panic. And he knew kind of I was comfortable, because as soon as we got to the bucket, which is this very small area that you can barely fit 3 guys into, the first thing I said to Mick is, I got to get outside the bucket. Otherwise I can't make pictures.
Right.
So he was like, all right. So I went over the side, and he kind of roped me out, and you just kind of literally go backwards, you angle backwards against your ropes, and then you get a little clearance to make a photograph. So it was fun.
In the beginning of the interview, it's just so casual. Like, yeah, so we're gonna go climb, and it's 5:30 in the morning. Just like nerves of steel. I don't. You must have an affinity towards climbing. That's what I thought. That's the case.
Let me just be completely upfront here too. I'm not a climber. I don't do rock climbing. I'm not an athlete on that level. But urban climbing, I've done a fair amount of, and it's all driven by getting my camera someplace that you ordinarily can't.
Getting the shot. Yeah.
Yep.
So we're staying in. The world is changing. You're working on some new material, and I wanted to also get your thoughts on COVID-19 and, as far as the industry, what you're seeing is the new trend, which is self-explanatory. We're doing it right now, but even more so.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced 9/11, in the very beginning, and that was, I thought, going to be the most devastating and significant news event of my lifetime, to be sure. This probably is going to make 9/11 seem relatively manageable by comparison, and I'm in no way minimalizing that event. 3,000 plus people died that day in an instant. But this is an ongoing enemy that has us all. I mean, it's invisible, but it's got the whole world shut inside the house, except for those brave folks who are responding, who are supplying food, who are trying to take care of our health, those folks on the front lines. The rest of us, the best thing we can do is nothing, right? There's very little in the way of resources that can be applied here, except to be cautious and take care of your loved ones and your neighbors. So the world is changing. Outside that window, I'm inside, as we're supposed to be. Right. Outside the window, the world is changing. I'm sure you're in this boat too. I have no idea what it's going to change into. There's going to be a reckoning here for sure. We're going to feel the reverb from this for many, many days, months, years to come, for sure.
Your thoughts on aspiring photographers, especially in this day and age, any tips for them? I mean, artistically speaking, and I've actually got another question that kind of stems from this, but just, anybody starting out, wanting to dabble in it, any quick tips?
Hmm. Well, first of all, you got to love it.
Right.
You really got to love it because it's just too hard to do. If you're really going to make a living, you mentioned dabble. If you're going to dabble in this, dabble away.
Right.
Go for it, man.
Right.
Have a great time. There's iPhones and an array of DSLR cameras that are available to folks at a price point that is like the technology that's available at a very affordable level is phenomenal. You've got cameras that are you can pick up at the store kind of for a song that you can go out and shoot 4K video with. I mean, the technology is outrageous. So have fun. That would be my main mandate. If you're going to be a dabbler, go for it. Have some fun. Get an Instagram account or a Flickr account and put your pictures up. Join a camera club. Share things. Do all of that great stuff. If this becomes an elevated concern for you and you want to make a living at this, that's a different ballgame.
Right.
Then it gets really serious. Like as a musician, there's lots of folks who play guitar in their home, but you've got the skills and the confidence to get on stage and play guitar for other people and sing and entertain. That's a different realm than sitting around and serenading your girlfriend. Right. Right. So it's the same thing with photography. When you take that step, when you cross that bridge and say, I want to be a professional at this, then a whole bunch of stuff starts to kick in. Right. You have to have skills. You have to be able to reproduce results. You have to go after it in a really hardcore way. And it becomes a whole swirl of your personality, your stick-to-itiveness, your business sense, in addition to your pictorial abilities.
You mentioned something, and this is the question I was going to bring up next. It's a great segue. Decision-making fatigue, creative fatigue. Thoughts on that? What happens? We all run into those blocks from time to time. Your experience with that?
Yeah, sure. Peaks and valleys, man, right? In the creative enterprise.
Yep.
Yeah. I find when I'm in a trough, and I've been in many, the best thing I can do is shoot my way through it. Just get bullheaded about the whole thing and keep going forward. When things are not good, that's, to me, the signal to be your most aggressive and fight your way through it. If you shrink, then it could just very well get the better of you. So if you feel your business isn't going well or you're not shooting well, then that's the time to pull it together and keep shooting. Put together, rummage through your files, find new work or old work that can be adapted, show people, get your stuff out there, stay energized, because if you get passive about this, on any level, it'll eat you alive. Not to
no, it's fantastic.
Hopefully that's not too graphic.
It's the truth. It's the truth. I've got meditation written down next to this, and if you want to get into spirituality, you're more than welcome to on the show. I had meditation written down next to it because in the artistic community, staying present is just key. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I think in life in general, staying present, everything just gets better. And in an instant, you can get kind of caught back from that and more retreated into getting a little bit too cerebral, not being here in the moment. Thoughts on that, for what it's worth?
Yeah, no, you definitely, especially when you're being in the moment. Obviously, this is a truism, of course, and it's obvious. When you get an assignment, you have to be in that moment. You have to really concentrate because somebody obviously has given you money to go shoot some pictures for them. So you have a responsibility to those folks to do the absolute level best that you have. So I do stay in the moment when I'm on location. Location is not an adventure for me. I mean, it is, but I don't view it as like a lark, for instance. I don't stay out late at night and,
Right.
I've never been here before, let's go bar hopping. I don't do that. I'm in my hotel room at 9:00 at night or whatever it is. I get a good night's sleep. I focus. And when I go after something, and I have the client's best wishes in my head, I go after it. I'm like a dog with a bone. I don't give up easy. And I think that's a big responsibility we have as photographers, because, like, for instance, you have to remember your responsibility as a storyteller. I did that aviation story for the National Geographic. So it was really cool, right? I got to fly in formation with the Blue Angels twice. I'm flying upside down. I'm pulling 6, 7, 8, 9 G's, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, you can get your yayas out and think, oh, this is really cool. I'm with the Blue Angels. But at the end of the day,
You got to get those shots.
you have to get the pictures, because there's 30 million pairs of eyes out there that are never going to have the opportunity to sit backseat in an FA-18.
Wow.
That's a big responsibility. You have to take that very visceral, powerful experience you're having, translate it through the lens of the camera, and give it to them. That's a big responsibility. And that to me, it makes this not a lark. It's not fun. It's work. Underneath of it, it's fun. I love it.
Right.
But, when I'm out there on a job, I'm working.
With that being said, you're getting into directing, or you've done it in the past, but because of the times now, you're doing a little bit more of it. The global warming documentary. Expand a little bit on that. Sure.
Cooper Island is a barrier island north of Barrow, Alaska, now called Ukhtavik. It's indigenous name. And Barrow is the northernmost tip of the physical United States. So you're way up there in the Arctic. Yeah. And I was sent up there by the New York Times Sunday magazine many years ago, in 2001, to photograph a zoologist who was studying for many years a colony of black guillemot birds, which sounds like really like, okay, why? He studies birds. But the thing about George, he's an amazing individual, tenacious as hell. At that point in time, he had been up there studying those birds 3 months out of every year for getting close to 40 years.
Wow.
And what had happened during that time, because he's kind of old school, he makes notes. There isn't enough power on the island. It's a deserted island. He subsists on solar power. So he's not like running computers and stuff like that. Right. He's making notes. So his notebooks now, flip forward, this past year when I visited him, was 45 years of notebooks, is maybe the single largest repository of global warming documentation on Earth.
Wow.
Because he's seen Cooper Island go from a stretch of hardcore ice in the Beaufort Sea to having no ice at all. So I went up there and I shot, it was a cover story for the Sunday magazine, and the cover slug was watching the Earth melt away. And I made a picture of George standing on ice. It's a pretty picture, Arctic sky behind him. He's got his bird scope, semi-silhouette, pretty picture. And George, we stayed friends. You get to know you're going to be friends when you're two guys by yourself with a Bunsen burner eating Dinty Moore beef stew on a stretch of godforsaken ice, and you're living in pup tents. I stayed up there for 9 days on my first visit.
Jeez.
And
do they drop you off by plane, or how does that?
I helicoptered out. I had to helicopter out to the island because the sea ice, even back then, was starting to grow unstable. For many years, George could get out to the island on snow machine because the ice was that thick.
Wow.
Now the ice is gone.
Wow.
George was telling me, he said, if you ever came back up, where you stood me for that picture in the Times magazine is now open water. The ice has retreated 400 miles to sea. So if I stood there again, I'd be up to my hips in water. And I said, George, I have to shoot that. I have to do this because that is powerful stuff. So I went up this time with a 5-person documentary crew. We had great shooters, and we produced a 14-minute film called Watching the Earth Melt Away. And in that film, there's a side-by-side of George standing on ice and George half submerged in water. And that's where pictures play a role, right, Jason? I mean, there's a lot of climate change deniers out there. Oh, it's just getting a little bit warmer, no big deal. This is the real deal. You look at this, you look at that, there's no argument left, right?
Right.
So we put that film out. It's on our YouTube channel, and it's been very well received. Now is a little bit of a break in the action. We were going to debut the film with George in Seattle about a month ago. That didn't happen. We're on hiatus, but we'll bring it back out in the fall and start to move it around and hopefully get it to some film festivals.
Well, that's exciting. Looking forward to seeing what happens with that. You're working on a book as well during quarantine. Yeah. Is that true?
I am. While I'm stuck inside, I'm starting to write a new book. I had written bits and pieces of it, but it was, let's say it wasn't a concerted effort. I get distracted. I'm a bit of a balloon. That's my meditation. If you want to circle back, I float away. I sit here at my desk. I'll be doing email and stuff, and then all of a sudden I'll be like, maybe I could take a camera and,
Yeah.
So those are my fanciful thoughts. But now I am turning my attention to writing a new book. So we'll see where it goes. See what happens.
Yeah. I've got 2 more questions for you in this part, and then we'll kind of wrap it up.
Cool.
Difference between good and great for you, as far as with the knowledge that you've seen, or excuse me, the knowledge that you've acquired through your career and the experiences that you've gone through and seen. What really separates the men from the boys, so to speak, or the women from the gals?
Over time, a lot gets said about the photographic industry in terms of, brilliant photographers, which I am not, brilliant this, or a magical this.
I beg to differ, but that's probably why you're so damn good, is because you keep beating yourself over the head like that.
Yeah, you got to keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
One thing that doesn't get talked about too often is durability.
Resilience, for sure.
It's true in my industry. It's true in your industry. I mean, look at the rock and roll folks, or the singers and music industry people you revere, who have been around and maintained a high level of work for 40 years. That's just not occasional brilliance. Man, that's tenacity.
Right.
That's durability. And it's mental, and it's physical, and it's emotional. So that's a big deal. I've had a lot of young assistants come along, like, breathing fire and like, oh yeah, no, it's gonna be great. I don't want to do this, and then they spend 6 months on the road, and they're like, oh yeah, well, maybe, So.
Yeah, for sure. Staying inspired and future plans, kind of put those two together here. Any thoughts, any words of wisdom on that, especially during these times?
Yeah, I just did a little thing. We have an Instagram account, Joe McNally Photo, and I just did a little video yesterday, literally like less than 2 minutes, where I, folks are asking like, well, how do you, can't shoot right now, really, can't go out and do assignments. So I have a book collection. I've been collecting photo books forever. And so they become a source of inspiration. And so I grabbed like 5 of them, and I did this little Instagram video, and people really responded.
Mm-hmm.
It's got like, that little video's got like 25,000 views since yesterday.
Wow.
And it's just me kind of saying, hey, this is, think about this, photographer, or refer back to this photographer. Here's someone you might not know. And those books for me have always been kind of a go-to place when things are dark and I can't dream up anything. And I think like, good God Almighty, I've got eyes of stone here. I'll go back to those books and I'll flip through them, and it opens my heart again photographically.
This just came to mind real quick. And it's probably hard to answer this, but and you don't have to go into detail. You can leave names out, but best and worst shoots of your career. Like, if anything, like if you got a funny story real quick of something that just went totally awry, you don't have to use any names, you don't have to use any details, but just, yeah, just there's something that just really railed you.
There's a bunch of failures, to be sure. I've had some wonderful shoots and met some wonderful people. That's the beauty of this, is the people you meet and the fact that the camera allows you entree into their lives. They're willing to sort of let you in because you're doing these pictures for someone, perhaps,
Right.
But I've had a lot of mishaps along the way. Good God, and it goes beyond just like missed airplane flights or bad shoots, or those are, too many to count, but you have some real kind of, whoppers. I was a young photographer and went down, I photographed all 3 launches and landings of America's space shuttle program.
Jeez.
So there was a storm, that came up right before a launch, the night before a launch. And what NASA allows you to do as a photographer is place cameras in the field around the rocket, because you can't physically be close to it, right? So you're
This
shooting.
sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's unreal. So your manned camera position is literally 1.5 miles, 2 miles away with 1,000 millimeter lens, 600 millimeter lens, huge lenses, shooting through heat waves. It renders your quality, less than it could have been. So you really rely on these cameras that you place in the field. They're called remotes in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And you get them all wired up and this and that. I won't go into the technical stuff. Well, the storm came up. And in short, I lost outright 5 motor-driven Nikon cameras in one shot. The wind came up and took my entire rig that had 5 cameras all over it, took it and literally threw it into a saltwater estuary, because it's all swampland around the rockets, right? And the launching pads.
Right.
And photographers, we begged NASA to go back out, and they let us go back out. It was a scene of carnage. I mean, there were grown men out there weeping, because their gear was just gone. It was ruined.
Oh my God.
Cameras were not my cameras. They were cameras that belonged to Time Life. And I was a young photographer. I thought my career was over. It was over, and so I had to go fish these cameras out. The only thing visible from my rig was this much of a tripod leg. I could see it because the saltwater estuary was such a violent storm. It filled with water. So there's signs all over there saying, beware of the alligators. And I'm in swamp water up to my neck. I can't see anything, and I'm trying to tug this thing out. And there was a photographer who shall remain nameless, good guy.
Sure.
He was on the shore, and I'm dragging my stuff out, and his stuff had gone even further. And he was from the South. He had one of those beautiful Southern accents. And he goes, Joe, you're already wet. He goes, go get my stuff. And so I'm out there, I'm like up to my neck, and I'm like, hey, you're from around here. Does the rain and the storms get the alligators moving around? And he's like, don't you worry about that. Just go get my stuff. So I totally destroyed 5 motor-driven Nikons and the lenses and the control pads and everything else that was ready to go. Oh my God, I had to go back to Time Life and explain to them that I just lost, $25,000 worth of equipment in one day. And they were blasé about it. They were like, yeah, all right, kid.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, stuff like that. Thankfully, it hasn't happened too often, but every once in a while, this whole field, the god of photography, just slaps you right in the face and says, get too cocky. Don't get too cocky,
That's good.
So.
That's good. Well, I mean, we'll kind of wrap up here. I've got a fun little thing that I do. I call it the shootout section, and it's always at the end. It's just, I say an industry phrase, or excuse me, an industry word that has to do with the guest's industry. In this case, photography, art, and you just kind of say the first word or first sentence or phrase that comes to mind.
Okay.
Photo.
Make it good.
F-stop.
Numbers. Important numbers.
Decimals. Light.
Language.
Yeah. Contrast.
Sharpness.
Interesting. Landscape.
Boring. No. No, God, I did that.
We'll use that as a promo clip. Don't worry about it. We'll make sure everybody sees that first.
There's some beautiful landscape photography that gets done. I'm not doing it because I'm not very good at it.
Black and white.
Legendary.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Man, we probably should have talked about that. We'll have to save that for some other time. Portrait.
Truth.
Wow. Location.
Excellent. Or needs to be excellent.
Yeah. Either in stills or moving pictures. 100%. Subject.
Everything.
Yeah. Flash.
I use too many of them.
It's worth it. In my opinion, from what I've seen. Fisheye.
Only occasionally.
Set. Like on set.
You mean like
being
concept?
on set. Yeah.
Pre-visualize.
Urban.
Where I thrive.
Country. Rural.
Love it.
All right, 2 more for you. New York.
Home.
Pizza.
New York.
Yeah. I love it. Final question for you.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now with the experiences that you've gathered, what would you tell him?
Relax. It's all going to work out. Work hard. Honor yourself and others. Love your family. Work hard. Did I mention work hard? Yeah, I think I did.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on the show. This was in the works for a couple of months, and we were going to be doing it around this time because I emailed your office back in January and said, hey, I'll be on tour in April, coming through. Well, that changed, but at least we're able to use Web 2.0 to our advantage here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jason. It's been great to reconnect and talk to you. Let's keep it together.
For sure. Any last words?
Just, a vote of thanks from inside the safe confines of my home to all those folks who are helping stitch the world together here. Just my heart and my hands go out to you.
For sure. We'll have all of your information in the description boxes. Not that it's needed. You're world-renowned. And I know I've said that like 3 times in this interview, but it's so true. Millions of views, millions of likes, millions of shares. So I'm honored and humbled. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Jason. Be well.
You too. You guys have been watching the Jason Damico Show or listening to the Jason Damico Show. Be sure to follow Joe with all the description box information and see what he's up to next. You guys stay safe and healthy out there. Continue to stay quarantined in and practicing good good social distancing if this is out and we're still in those confines. Peace out, folks. See you on the next one.